Well, hey there, it's Alka.
And Jen, and welcome to another episode of the Creative and Ambitious Entrepreneur Podcast. And in this episode, we are talking about the lessons COVID has taught us about how to generate wealth.
This is an exciting episode. It's going to be a little bit of our reflections as to what we have understood over the last little bit, but also we want to help you so that in case this is something that you hadn't really thought of, want to prompt those and start having giving you those points to start discussions with your family and your friends about how you can keep your generate that wealth for you that's going to keep you safe and thriving even when there's an emergency and a total change in your life because of something like COVID. Mm-hmm. It's not just always COVID, right? It's like anything that sort of unbalances the normal way of what we thought was going to be happening for us, and then all of a sudden something terrible happens where we are faced with the realities that maybe we weren't able to actually handle things properly, and we're sort of left a little bit sort of insecure in terms of being okay with our finances, and also maybe our position where we are physically in life, mm-hmm. and also what we have to do in order to continue to create that wealth so that we can keeping our lifestyle happy and moving forward. I don't know if I said that correctly, but it's just something that during COVID, when all of a sudden we knew that COVID was coming and that there were this issue where we had to stay at home and people couldn't work and others were risking their lives to work and still are, it makes you reflect, right? And you go like, okay, so what am I doing right now to keep me safe? Mm-hmm. One of the things that we obviously have to touch on when it comes to safety is wealth, because we need to have the money to do the things we need to do, right? Like whether it's to pay for hospital bills or to be able to not work somewhere where we feel we're endangered, and so on. And so this is the episode today that we're going to talk about some of these more financial things that might have allowed you to have a different experience during what's been going on with COVID so far, for whatever might happen in the future. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get started.
Yeah, so the first point that we want to cover is the uncertainty of having a job or losing your job, and then also the false sense of illusion that we've created where we think that having a 9-to-5 job is the most secure option for us, and that, it's untouchable. We're never going to get fired. We're never going to lose money. Like, we're not going to have a pay deductible or whatever you call it. And it's just this secure thing that people in their minds would rather be in a 9-to-5 job than be an entrepreneur or have a side hustle or something. And this was actually a point that was brought up in one of our coaching call sessions recently, where a lot of students and clients of ours think that, why am I so scared to go all in to be an entrepreneur? They need to have that security of the 9-to-5 on the side to make sure that they still have that income coming in. And during COVID, we saw a lot of people lose jobs or lose hours from their jobs and actually have that sense of security taken away from them, like in an instant, right? In this instant that COVID happened, we didn't expect this. We weren't preparing for this. And so COVID has definitely taught us a major lesson in terms of being prepared and having that sense of security that a 9-to-5 job may give you at this point in time.
Have it as a security. Yeah.
Have it as a security, but also think that, maybe that you need to have something else also going for you. That 9-to-5 job that is so secure to you at this point in time might not actually be secure, right?
No, it isn't. That's the thing. And we were taught that that's what you do, right? You go work for others so that they'll give you money and then you'll be taken care of.
Yeah.
And it's so not true, right? And so we want to just I know if you're listening or watching this podcast, you'll know that we're entrepreneurs. We work online and we have businesses that allow us to get paid through a company called Zazzle, and they pay us royalties for our licensing our designs on products that they're going to sell through print on demand. Mm-hmm. And so we already have an online business. So when COVID hit, one of the lessons that we learned specifically ourselves was that our business is COVID proof. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was thriving during COVID. So, and nothing in our businesses and our life really changed, except that we had to stay home. We couldn't travel. And I almost feel guilty saying that, but that was intentional way back before even COVID hit, because I'd had so many other experiences in my life where I was always dependent on someone else for my wealth. And I said, that's it, I'm done. I need to now take care of my own wealth, and it's my responsibility. And so when I started my online business on Zazzle, which is the platform that we use, and whether it's this business or any other business, if you're starting an online business, then set those like goals right away that say, okay, this is what I want out of it. So for me, when I started this business on Zazzle, I said, I don't want to be dependent on anyone else. And I also want it to be very foolproof in terms of, if something happens, it's flexible. There's a possibility that it'll bounce back, or that it'll never even get affected by a lot of possibilities that might be something that would affect other types of scenarios of getting money to come to me. And I'm just being very literal about it, because that's all you're really doing. You're just like getting money to come to you to pay your bills and have fun and invest for the future and all that stuff. And so I was really happy when I realized that our Zazzle businesses that we have were not going to be affected by COVID. And in fact, they were thriving during COVID, and still is. And they'll be thriving even after. And so that was one of the lessons that I really learned, is that I made a good choice, that I picked a business that actually was, at least for the case with COVID, foolproof in terms of, or bulletproof, I would actually say. It's more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's really important, because a lot of us, even to this day, sometimes I fall back to that training that we got as kids and as adults, that you have to work for someone else because that's the secure way, right? And it's really not. There's risk everywhere.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. I'm sure a lot of you who are listening can resonate with that. So the second point that we want to cover is location freedom and working from any space rather than, let's say, a physical office or in a job that you are actually being put at risk because of COVID, right? At the beginning of COVID, we had never, ever, thought of hand sanitizer, washing our hands, masks, being a physical distance away from somebody. And now that's very much prevalent and on our brains, right? That we are now in a space with people who possibly might be sick, or something might happen. And I know that's sort of very scary and very morbid to talk about, but it's very much our reality right now, that when you're in a space with somebody who you don't know, you're unsure, you're uneasy, you don't know what's going to happen. And so being in a physical office or a space where you might need to go out and meet new people for your job, you definitely have that in the back of your mind, that you're always at risk. You are taking a risk to be at your job because you need the money, right? And so when COVID first happened, as Elka mentioned, we were extremely fortunate because we've created our online businesses years ago, almost 15 years ago. So we already had the mentality of the fact that we can always work from home, and that we don't need to be in a physical office to work, because we created our own business online.
Yeah, and we don't have to be in contact with people either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when COVID first began and people had started to be at risk, frontline workers, or even people that you would never even think would be at risk, like grocery workers, or if you're at the pharmacy, store clerks, or if you're at the gas station, people who would never in a million years be at risk had found out they are now at risk. And it was not something that we were ever prepared for. And so COVID really taught us about how important it was to understand that, your physical space is extremely, you need to be careful, right? Yeah. And that you have that risk no matter what, in whatever job you're in, no matter if you're at the hospital or if you're literally at the grocery store as a store clerk. And when we heard a lot of our clients who have 9-to-5 jobs or other jobs on top of, a side hustle that they've created on their online business, that they had to go into work and they were double masking, they were wearing all these gloves and like almost hazmat suits, we just felt extremely we felt for them, and then we wanted them to obviously be able to be supported by their online business. But at the same point in time, we were extremely grateful that we weren't in that position, because we decided way back when to create an online business. And so COVID has given us this whole new respect for being in physical places and having that, safety of being distanced by people or from people that you don't know and that you're not unsure about, if that makes sense, right?
So, and also because like Jen's talking about the location and there's sort of that fear that we want to get back into, talk a little bit about, is the fact that it was such a thing to take on, such a stress, right? That you had to do this. You had to put your life at risk. And I mean, there are people, maybe some of you that are listening to the podcast are actually like, no, COVID's not even a thing. And like, I get that. I respect each and every one of your opinions about COVID, but whether it's COVID or anything else that's a change, why should that affect your ability to generate wealth to take care of you and your family, right? And so, and also to have to put your life at risk, so to speak, because like people, even if people didn't believe in COVID, they still got sick, right? And some of them passed away, which is really unfortunate, because it is ultimately a reality. And so that, whether you're fearing about it or not, but you put your life at risk to earn dollars. And that's unfortunate because you want to be in that position to have a business running for you, or wealth, generating more wealth for you in a way that doesn't make you at risk, right? And this is why we're talking about location, is that, gosh, all of a sudden you had to risk your life just because you're flipping burgers at McDonald's because the takeout was still working. And as Jen said, like whether it's your coworkers or you have interaction with customers, it may have been that by accident something happened, and so that you ended up getting sick or whatever. And I think it's really important to remember that you have the ability to control how you generate your wealth. And it doesn't have to be specifically related to a physical location. And the fact that, like, I don't know. I like watching Mamma Mia, by the way. And there's this little scene in there. She's doing her dance and she's talking about, that like this guy shouldn't be thinking that he could have her. And in the end, she goes like, "We've done good, girls." And so then they walk away because all the guys are like falling down on the beach. And she's saying, "We've done good." And I feel that way. Like, I feel like I did well. I've done good by choosing to generate my wealth in a way that wasn't going to be affected by whether it's COVID or something else. And because of that, I had that freedom that I didn't have to do the things that I personally, a very empathetic person. I was like, I feel for every single person who's risking their lives every single day because they have to do their job. And I just want everyone to know. And if you're listening to this, I want you to know you don't have to risk your life. In fact, I don't want you to, because I want you to stay safe. I want you to survive this thing. This is a thing, and it's going to pass, but let's not make you a victim of it, right? And I think that's so important, and some people didn't have that choice. And because of the location part of this. And it's such I really, my heart goes out to you if you've had to make that choice, or you've, every day had to go into work and feel worried. Because I'm just almost like shutting down because I'm feeling that I'm carrying the burden for you. And had you maybe set up a business that works for you, like an online business like our Zazzle businesses, that would allow you to say, no, I'm not going into work, I quit, at that moment in time when instead you had to go in, boy, that would just change my life, and it would change your life, and I'd feel so much better for you, because as much as some people needed to be in there for essential work, not everyone needs to risk, right? Like, some people had to risk only because they couldn't afford not to, right? And so that's really important. I hope I explained it properly.
Yeah, definitely did.
All right.
So the next point that we wanted to talk about is pivot your business to reflect the current times. And this came to us as a big shock. Obviously, COVID happened out of nowhere, really, and it changed a lot of things, especially with what we were just talking about in terms of being in a physical location, but also how your business runs. So many businesses, like physical businesses, were affected. People had to shut down or close their doors or stop production or X, Y, and Z. So many things happened because of this one event. And so it really taught us the major lesson of making sure that we're able to pivot on a dime, change the ways that we're working so that we can still make money and generate that wealth, right? Because if all of a sudden our business was shut down, because of COVID, we didn't prepare for that. We had also just been on our coaching call right now with our Profit by Design Academy coaching clients, and we said, make sure that you have at least 6 months to a year in terms of money that you can use to go forward if something happens with an emergency fund. And because COVID happened so rapidly, like a lot of people didn't prepare for that, and a lot of people were really affected by the fact that they had to shut down their businesses. And thankfully within our business, because we are on the online space, we were able to pivot within our means and within our realm, and make sure that we were able to generate that wealth and keep going and offer certain things to our customers during the times of COVID. And so it gave us the opportunity to actually learn and understand that not only does it need to happen when COVID happened, but that we need to understand how to pivot no matter what situation and no matter when, right? And that we always have to be sort of on alert to make sure that we're always with up the current times and always being able to generate that wealth. Because if something happens right away, we can't just be stuck like a deer in the headlights trying to figure out what to do. We have to be prepared and take strategic action steps. I always mess up on that. It's like a tongue twister for me. Strategic action steps, and implement them into our business so that we're not stuck, right? You're not there like worried as heck that where are you going to generate that wealth?
Yeah, and actually, in one of our coaching programs, which is we actually, I won't go into the details because it's a program that we no longer offer because we're now doing the coaching program for the Profit by Design Academy. But what we did was, as soon as COVID hit, we as coaches and the people who are in our community, we gave them like a 35-page pivot strategy outline, right? So we literally looked at what it is that we could do now that COVID has hit, because some people were affected because, let's say, people were selling wedding invitations, for example, and that was the core of their business. And now all of a sudden there weren't any wedding invitations being sold because weddings weren't allowed to be happening, right? And so their business went down, even if on the same online business where our business numbers, like our earnings didn't change. But some people who were on this Zazzle platform were not able to pivot easily enough or not be affected because they weren't ready. They didn't have the strategy. So in order to generate that wealth consistently, you have to not only be ready ahead of time, even if there isn't an issue, but then what we love about the Zazzle platform is that, as I said, we created this pivot guide, and within like a couple months, less than sometimes 2 months, the people who use that pivot guide and that's changed their strategy, recouped their sales. They all of a sudden were making different products with different designs on them and targeting different customers, and they recouped what they lost when the whole thing hit. And all of a sudden there were no weddings going on. I'm just using that as an example, but there were other things that weren't selling, and all of a sudden they were starting to get sales again. And I think that's really important for two reasons. One is, first of all, for us, like I said, we didn't actually have an issue, so we knew that we had set up our business properly. Whereas the people who had an issue, who had a lack of sales after having quite good sales, meant that there was a gap in their business. And so first of all, they had a chance to learn that they had a gap in their business. But secondly, that once they got the right strategic action steps to take and they implemented them, then they could easily pivot. And I love that about the Zazzle business model, especially in the online space, right? Like, let's say you're a brick and mortar store and you're doing clothing, you're selling clothing, you have an inventory, right? And that inventory has to be brought from somewhere. They have to make the clothes. You have to decide. You have to order the color that you think is going to be in style, and all that stuff. And so there's like these chunks of time where you can't pivot that quickly, right? And whereas online, all you have to do is digitally change something, and you can do that in an instant. And I think that's one of the big things that we realized is having an online business allows you to pivot really fast.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that kind of ties in with our second last point, which is to have an exit strategy and to always be prepared. If you don't know what an exit strategy is, it basically means that be prepared to leave your business or have your business working for you where you're not physically working for it all the time, right?
Yeah.
And especially within the online space and with the platform Zazzle, which we use, we are able to not always be physically present, but still make money. And we're generating that wealth. We don't always have to be on the computer making products or selling things. We can be off the computer and still make money while we're not there physically.
Yeah.
And so having an exit strategy, whether that be not only if you have, a brick and mortar business or an online business, but just knowing that what do you have to do to prepare to either make your business run for you or to leave the business and sell it, because you need to, change things up and to move on to the next thing. And it had the lesson that we learned during COVID was sometimes we don't actually think about an exit strategy. We start an online business. We're just starting a business.
Like,
why would we want to think about
Yeah.
how to leave the business?
Yeah.
And we have been taking so many amazing online courses with so many different mentors and coaches for our own personal growth as well as our business. And a lot of them have said, you need to prepare for this. This is something that needs to be part of your business plan. And everybody thinks that having a business plan means you get from, zero to start to finish, but finish is like you're still working and the business is running and you're working for the business. But finish actually means, that either the business is working for you or you've actually left the business.
And you made a lot of money selling it.
Yeah.
What I learned from all the coaching that we've just received on that is that you actually have to remember that every decision you make should be actually have in mind you exiting the business. And it seems so counterproductive, as Jen said, that you're just starting the business, you want to make this business grow, but then you're the worker. You're not the benefactor of the business. You're just a worker in the business. Whereas if you think of it as like, okay, so I'm going to start this business now, and it's going to be passive, right? As the income is going to be passive. I'll have to do work initially, but it's going to be not only passive that I don't have to be there in order for the money to come in, but also passive on like long term, that if I work once and then that work continues to make me money, like i.e. creating a design on a product once on Zazzle and it's selling over and over again year after year, that's considered passive income, right? And so you're not physically having to create that design every single time. Yeah, the Zazzle employee has to print it and ship it to the customer, but that's not you. You are the person who's getting paid from Zazzle every time one of these designs sells on a product instead. And so the business model is so lucrative in terms of this business that we run right now. But the key here is that, people are shocked when they hear us say, well, we only work about 4 hours, if that, every month. And our business is running and we make, X amount of money and all that stuff. And they go like, how is that possible? And it's because we've set it up as an exit strategy, right? We've said, we want to set this up. We're more than willing to put in the time when necessary. But once it's running, we don't want to keep running it. We want it to run for us, right? And so by having, this happen with COVID, let's bring it back to COVID and wealth. First of all, it's turning like this passive business that we use Zazzle for is a cash flow generating business, right? So it's creating cash flow even if we're not working, which is cool. And even some people have, like, I've had corporate lawyers contact me and say, hey, this Zazzle store from the person who's deceased has been willed to the estate. Could you help us use it to continue to generate wealth for the people who, inherited the business? And it's like, yeah, that's like, of course I've helped them, but on the other hand, it made the point here is you realize that this business is not just for you to make money this month. This business is an investment, and the property that you have on that business, because each of your designs is actually copyrighted property, and Zazzle pays the royalties for the use of it, you realize, okay, that's actually a willable estate asset. And it's really interesting because a lot of people forget that this business is actually an asset. It's not just something that makes you some money to pay your rent for the month. And then the second part of this is that during COVID, that asset was growing and it continued to generate wealth. So let's say we didn't get sick, which was really awesome, but if we would have gotten sick, or something happened, like all of a sudden power went out or anything, our business, like us physically managing or doing the business, was not a necessity. It was still happening, right? So therefore, we weren't working in the business. We have already set our business up so that the business is working for us. And so many other times, not just COVID, but we've had some tragedies in our life over the last 10 years where we are so glad that our business is working without us working in it, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to handle being with the people that needed to be helped, like my mom with her hip, or when we were grieving because we lost a relative. That kind of thing is really important to know, that that's part of your exit strategy, is to say, okay, I'm going to start by being a worker in my business to set it up, but then I'm going to slowly decide how I'm going to move myself out of that business, and it still works for me, and it doesn't just work at the same level, it actually continues to work even better and expand and make more money after I'm no longer in the business, which is really cool.
Yeah. Yes.
And then I wanted to make one more point. I know I really went on that one, but during COVID, if you're listening to this, and if you had like a brick and mortar store and you hadn't exited, specific, when we're talking about the exit, we're not saying you've sold the business, but let's say you would have had to have sold the business because of COVID, for example. Were you prepared, and did you have your business set up in such a way that it was a lucrative thing to buy, or was it like a garage sale? And did you lose money because of that? And so always, always, always remember that to generate wealth, you have to always be thinking about your exit strategy, even when there isn't a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah. And that kind of ties in with also our last point here, which is diversify by having multiple sources of cash flow. So if you have one business, and then, as Alka mentioned, and you had to sell it, and it became sort of a garage sale where you sold it for much less than it's worth, then you obviously took a hard hit. And so COVID, one of the major lessons that COVID has also taught us is that we can't have everything all in one basket. You have to have multiple sources of income, cash flow, diversify, have investments. And one of the major ones that we did during COVID was we took some of our earnings and we invested them into an income property. And so we have now an income property that is going to be generating us some other type of cash flow, rather than it just being tied only solely to our Zazzle businesses or our online businesses. And many of you probably have investments, or maybe you also have a rental property, or you've invested in some other type of cash flow generating opportunities. But definitely,
and if you've done that, that's great.
Yeah,
kudos to you.
Always take an opportunity to do some research and take some of your earnings and save, like in terms of your savings, you obviously want to have your emergency fund, but also take a portion of some of your earnings and invest it, because you want to have your money make yourself money, rather than it just being stored in the bank, where the bank is actually making money or using it in return for it being inside your bank account, right? And so if you have yet to take some time to look into certain investments, and we definitely recommend that you do so. We're obviously not financial advisors and we cannot give you advice, but it's definitely a really great opportunity for you to explore and expand in terms of your cash flow generating opportunities, so that you're not always fearful and you actually are able then to rest easy and sleep well at night, knowing that not only do you have an online business or maybe even a brick or mortar business, but you then have some other cash flow that's helping you generate that wealth during, these tough times ahead. That's one of the major lessons that COVID taught us, is that you can't just solely rely on one thing. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that. Going back to our first point in terms of losing that secure 9-to-5 job that you thought you would have forever and ever, right? If you lost your job or you lost hours, that really affected you. And you now have a completely new perspective on what it means to actually have a job and generate that wealth throughout your years to come, right?
Yes. And also, what the last point I want to make is just pick something that is problem proof. Let's put it that way. Yeah, something where, as much as you can think of weird scenarios that might happen in the future, what business is always going to be needed? What business is always going to be there, right? And no matter what, because people still need things. There is still a ton of money around. It never goes away. It's just moved to different people's hands. And so what is it that you could provide as a service when you create your online business that will allow you to, like, and a while back it was like, what's recession proof? But we're not even like in a recession, but something still happened to us, right? So what is it that people will need ultimately, and they'll always need?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you want to work on. Don't just sort of come up with something really strange and unique that only a small subset of the population needs, or that will be a fad and it will go out of trend soon. Think of some things that are business ideas that are evergreen. And this is how we train our students as well to sell on the Zazzle platform. We don't say, hey, go after the latest trend. Go with the things that are consistently selling no matter what the trend is. And so do that with your choice of business as well. And so what COVID taught us is that the online space is definitely never going away. And so that allowed us to say, hey, we've picked the right business model because our business is an online business. And people are always going to shop. Yeah. And so at least that can help you feel secure that this is a way to generate wealth for you, no matter what the situation, even when it's something crazy like a plague that's worldwide, which just changed the normal of whatever was normal. And it has yet to settle down, right? Like, there's still stuff happening all over the world as we're recording this podcast. And yet some people are flourishing and others are not. So when you're choosing your online business idea, make sure that you do that research and feel confident about what your choice is, so that you can hedge your bets the best you can.
Yes.
All right?
So thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Creative and Ambitious Entrepreneur Podcast, where we have talked about the lessons that COVID has taught us in terms of generating wealth. And we hope to see you in the next episode. Bye.
Yeah, take care.